Stu, welcome to the Human Endurance Podcast. Super excited to have you on today.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Let's jump right into the episode. Could you tell us more about who you are and what it is that you do?
I am Stu Holliday. I'm a chartered sports psychologist. I've been doing the role for about 12 years in the UK, but I have clients internationally. I've worked in Olympic sport for GB Archery, and currently I'm the GB Olympic Swimming Psychologist. And I've also worked for para swimming and the England Netball team. And I did some time working for Liverpool Football Academy. So I've got a broad range of different sport skills that I do in my consultancy for the elite, but actually my real passion is endurance sport as well. I'm a keen runner and cyclist, and I have my own organization, Endurance Mind Coaching. And what we do is have a cohort of athletes who are in a program which upskills their mental performance while they train their physical sport that they do. We've got swimmers, we've got runners and a former cyclist in the cohort currently, and it goes really well. People really get a lot from it. They take a different perspective of thinking on their sport and their performance, and I want to be able to bring my world of elite sport to more of a amateur weekend warrior, high achieving sub-elite market.
Let's start from the basics. So you mentioned that one of your initiatives, you're basically working with amateurs and trying to bring this Olympic sport mentality to them. How would you define mental toughness or mental resilience? What does that mean to you in the context of sports?
That's a good question, and I've been asked it on more than one occasion. Mental toughness is almost like a branch of resilience, and it's something which is very much in vogue. And obviously in the world of endurance, it makes sense because, say, compared to 100-meter sprints, if you do that sport, it's bang, go, done. Whereas our sports of endurance are much longer activities on the whole. And so the idea of mental toughness as a construct and how it could be developed are very popular. And for me, I think it's applying the skills of sports psychology into different challenging environments that you might be in your training and in your racing. So mental toughness is really a popular concept that people want to develop and nurture, but a lot of people may think is static. Either you're born with it or you don't have it. And through the research that I understand and know, and my work in elite sport and training that I've had, I know that all athletes can make improvements and gains, even if they actually feel like they're very poor with their mental toughness and resilience. And that's why they come to me. That's why I do the work with them. But I try and do it in a structured way, supporting the athlete, making them feel empowered so that gives them confidence to be able to power and push through and deal with usually the endurance pain side. That's where people feel they need mental toughness training or have more resilience. And if you follow some essentials and you track it, then often we can return back to where they thought they were. And after a month or so, they can see they've made improvements to that aspect of their running or their cycling or whichever endurance sport they do.
I'm actually super curious from like the last point you mentioned to track your mental resilience. How do you do that with your athletes?
Well, this is the thing. Most people will use Strava and obviously you can keep notes in Strava every time you do any exercise these days. You might be using a platform like Training Peaks or Final Surge. Often people outsource that to their coaches. So that's cool, whatever you do. But people will know and understand on a week what their sessions look like across the board, from intervals to long aerobic sessions to strength and conditioning. But what people don't do is actively analyze their thinking during each of those performance parts of the week. So if you're doing a 14-week training block for whatever sport, how do you know how your mentality was like in week 1 when you're in week 12? And when you ask people, they'll often just pick out, oh, I had a terrible run terrible brick session, terrible whatever. Okay, what was wrong about it? And they're kind of trying to piece it together mentally, but they're kind of taking fragments of information because they've done so much other training since. And when I get people to keep a track of their performance, a little download almost every time they've done a key session in a week, and then they go back at the end of their training session near the beginning, and they look at how their thinking has evolved, how their confidence has evolved, how they've got through sessions, how they've used tools that have helped improve their performance on the track, on the bike, or whatever. That's rich data from that moment, which would just get lost in memory. And then if you think about it, if you can really analyze how you were through a cycle, then when you come back to like your taper and you're looking back over your training, you've got all that information about a long run or that really hard brick session, and you can find the individual memories and little gains that you've been making, and that's invaluable because obviously in taper time, that's where people tend to go off on mental journeys, often in quite a negative fashion, and start questioning whether all the training has been sufficient or of high enough quality, and they get themselves in little spirals. And so by being more analytical and aligning your physical training with your mental journey, you're going to have a much more objective view when it comes to that time where people get paranoia or they go down with phantom niggles in that week before their big event.
Okay, got it. Nice. And could you elaborate a bit on, you mentioned that you track how you track now the mental work that you do across your training cycle. Could you elaborate a bit how, when you work with an athlete that comes to you, how you start working with them? Do they often come with a specific issue, like pre-race nerves, or do they just come and say, hey, I want to invest a bit more generally in mental training? And then how do you work with them? Do you do like only help them to work on key sessions or the training overall?
It's a really good question. Each individual athlete is unique. What they come with could be from a bad experience in a race. They trained really hard for an event and it didn't come off. And they've analyzed it in their headspace before they come to me, and they've worked out physically I was okay on the day. That worked on the day, but actually it's more about the mental piece. And I had a horrible day and I never want to repeat that. And people invest a lot of time and money in their sport, especially in endurance sport, where you might only get one or two bites at the cherry in a big competition, either a 72 triathlon or 2 marathons a year maximum, maybe. You do get people who do more, but that's probably a different problem that we might have to resolve. And then so that they've got a unique thing that's them. It could be, like you say, pre-race anxiety eats them up, and all that hard training is somewhat wasted before they even cross the start line, and they start doubting themselves, and the rest of their race from the start gun is horrible. It could be people struggle in the midpoint of a race, lose their focus mentally and lose the race there, or it could be in the latter stages, because of course that's where you're most physically fatigued. People have problems there. It could be something else entirely. So when I'm getting people to create their mental diary, it is unique to the individual. And we've got this program called the Unbreakable Athlete. And what that means is not that all athletes are going to be built like warriors, but every athlete can improve. And I've had people from very, very high level, like top 5 finishers in marathon and ultras races, even a winner, actually, thinking about, because I do trail as well as road coverage for the sport. And that's a massive market that's opened up in the last 5 to 10 years. UTMBs, like the New Year's Eve party for Ultra World. And then you've got all the American big races there. So depending on what the athlete brings, I can formulate, I've got the program is mapped to your specific needs. Everyone has to have a baseline. So it's all actually funny, not about mental toughness in the beginning. It's about growing your emotional flexibility, because when people tend to come to me, they're thinking about their event and their sport is quite fixed. I'm never going to get better. I can't mentally improve. And what we need to train is like being able to take a more backward step and have a bigger, wider perspective. And emotional flexibility, emotional regulation are key to that. So I try and get people to really start there. And again, people, it's not something that we often train. The psychological part of performance, where do people start? How would you go about, if you think for yourself now, if you needed to improve your mental strength, toughness, flexibility for racing, where would you go? Where's the handbook? Where's the guide? There isn't one. But again, even when I see some people who try to do it, they'll have chapters on, you need to do this, you need to do this, you need to do this. But unfortunately, it doesn't talk to the unique capabilities of an athlete. Whereas with the program we've got, we need to get you thinking more like a pro, because that's the other thing. More amateur athletes, they never take the time to explore what do the elites do that I could implement. And of course, with my experience, I've periodized the psychological training for many, many athletes in archery and in swimming and elsewhere, so that I'm on site where I see the whites of their eyes, I know what they're going through. How can I provide the core elements to any endurance athlete and then help them learn, first of all, really to think more like a pro would? Because often, let's just one example. If you're a high level, say you're a marathon runner, sub-3, 2:45 level, and you've got to that level through great coaching, determination, hard work, but you want to go and lose another 5 minutes or whatever it might be. And you know that the mental piece is really important. Maybe you're quite psychologically skilled and that's what's got you to that level. The bit that's going to help you in those final, in your next race, in the final parts, we need to kind of really analyze how you think, but they haven't ever thought like an athlete. And one thing is that you often get again and again and again is people have a bad training session and they then make the connection that bad training session means that the whole cycle is gone to waste. They're not going to have a good race. It's all for nothing. And an elite level athlete never thinks like that. Their approach is, it was a sucky session, I bombed out, I need to park that performance, get to bed and start again tomorrow, not have a pity party that lasts a week or 2 or 3 or the rest of their cycle. So if I help people upskill to think like a pro to begin with, and they've got that emotional flexibility, we're already ahead of schedule, because they're thinking differently to their club mate who runs exactly the same time. They're thinking in a different way. They're approaching that new race that they've got in a completely different way than they've ever done before. And if you've got all your nutrition, S&C, aerobic work dialed in, this is an area where you could make the most gains often.
I want to ask you a very practical question. So I think it was even this weekend, was it 2 weeks ago? One of my athletes did a marathon, and it was the second marathon this year. Yeah, I've been coaching him for about 1.5 years, maybe 2 years, something like that. And he's super diligent, very hard worker, very determined, has already improved a lot. And he's done a half marathon like 6 weeks ago. He did a really great time and he was ready for a PB in this marathon. Already the week of the race, he was telling me, oh, my race nerves are here. I'm like feeling very weird and I'm not sure how it's going to go. Like, do you have any tips? And then I shared with him something that I learned from my tennis days, which was, hey, like do some visualization. Think about the moment you are at the race. Imagine, you start the race, you're feeling good, you keep going, and imagine the moment when things get hard, that you actually push through so that when you're there, you actually feel like you've gone there before with your mind and you're able to do that. Unfortunately, it didn't go so well. So actually he had a very terrible race. So clearly my advice didn't work. What advice would you give to somebody that was in his position?
Well, now you've got that data, you know exactly what part of the problem is. You said it yourself there. He was getting to taper and then beginning to panic, but hadn't done any work through his training cycle to practice visualization, for one thing. It's a hard skill, even at the elite level. I've got athletes who go, I want to do visualizations to you. And it's like, right, well, this is a good time. Post-Worlds, beginning of the season, you're working towards the Europeans next summer, 2026. if we want to build you a visualization program, we need to start now because it's a trainable skill. All the evidence shows us that. But if you leave it to 2 weeks before the race, and that's no judgment on you, by the way, in your coaching, because they brought it to you and they hadn't flagged that this was what they wanted. So it's on the athlete a little bit more, dare I say it. But you know now, both together, that if he goes to that third marathon, that like, okay, well, let's maybe look at a visualization program that can fit in while you're training and in your tune-up races. So there's that aspect. I think I'd go back even further though, and I'd go as far as saying, like, how this person interprets the feelings they get before a race. And what they're saying is, you know, this wasn't their first rodeo. They had marathons before, but they hadn't flagged that actually there's a chance that in the build-up, in the taper, they're seeing nerves, feeling nerves, and calling them nerves. And in elite sport, we always train, that's just your body preparing for competition, your mind getting ready for this very significant event. We need to work at reframing it. And when we reframe those things, the feelings are exactly the same. The emotions and the rushing kind of thoughts are the same. But if you interpret them in a more positive light and see excitement as opposed to nerves, and kind of, again, work as early as possible on this, you know, if you know that this has happened before, your role together as coach and athlete is to say, what went wrong? How can we make improvements? Next time we do a 10K race, and it's more of a practice to see where you are in your training, let's work at reframing what those feelings are like, and change the narrative to be more about what I'm experiencing is excitement. I've done the training. I'm in really good shape. I want to go out there and race. That part of my character is feeling nervous, but it's almost like a false message. And I need to understand that what I'm getting is just noise, because actually we know that I've hit the splits. My VO2 max, my lactates are exactly where we want them. I need to be a professional in the way that I approach it. And then if I get it right in how I see how I'm going to do this race, I'll still feel that nervousness. You know, you'll be on the start line, the heart rate will be going like that. The palms of the hands will be sweaty. Oh, you know what it's all like. And as someone, my professor said, there's a reason they put lots of toilets near the start of these races and events. And then, you know, within a mile of the start, the wave of adrenaline surge that you'll experience goes down, and then you're in the race. So really the only thing that athlete needs to really work on is the 5 or 10 minutes before the gun goes, and the first minute or two while everything then settles down as they get into their rhythm.
Yeah, very good point. I also personally realized just through my journey in endurance sport that at the beginning, I really, you know, from what you said, that resilience is a flexible concept. In the beginning, I think I was very unresilient. And I do think you train that a bit automatically over time, because, like, for example, intervals, I would always think, I can't do them. That's too hard. You know, I would already fail before I even started them. And then now over time, I also do a lot of self-talk, you know, especially when something in a race doesn't go as I want. And I'm like, hey, things are going okay. Like, you can do this, you know, really, like, not letting the negative thoughts overtake. But I really feel personally how this developed over time, just also through training and through just constantly doing hard sessions and overcoming them. Do you agree with this statement that it comes a bit naturally to build this mental resilience, or you really think, you know, big part plays this outside person or this outside coaching from like a mental coach such as you?
I mean, there's a classic quote that, and it's talking about therapy, but the same could probably apply in sports psychology. Not everyone needs a sports psychologist or do sports psychology, but everyone can benefit from it. So there's that part to think about, and it isn't for everyone. I work with an athlete who's sheer bloody minded, and they've won various races. We still go out and train together as friends, and he'll surreptitiously be asking questions, which I kind of know he's probing a bit to make those little gains for himself. Absolutely fine with that. But I think what you're saying is true. I think if the more experienced you get, the more tuned in you are to understanding the demands of going to track and doing interval work, for instance. at first it's really scary to go because maybe you feel a bit inadequate compared, I remember when I was first told by a friend in my athletics club after 6 months, and he saw me make improvements, and he said, you should come to track, and you'll go even quicker. And I said, track. And it was this mythical thing, like, oh my God, I can't go there. That's where the really fast people go.
Right.
And I was not a bad athlete at this level, but it felt really daunting. I was very immature. It's 15 years ago in that regard. But once I actually broke my own duck and like my fear and went, like you, I also got quite good by just showing up week in, week out. And it was always a little bit daunting because, you've had a long week, then you've got to go and thrash yourself, and you've got to mentally get in the zone of being at track. So like you kind of grow that skill. I guess it's that thing that it depends how far you want to improve, how much you want to overcome bad feelings that you may experience. I do have athletes who kind of feel they race well, but they are concerned that they're training, and they hate training, they hate doing long runs, they hate doing hills, and they almost want help to get over those things.
Mm.
And so I think if you train hard enough consistently, you will make improvements physically and mentally. True. But I also think if you, like anything, if you look at mobility work, if you look at strength work and you go to the gym and you deadlift, you do yoga, you do all the different postures or whatever it might be, you could do that on your own watching a YouTube video and you'd get improvements. But then if you go to a gym and you say, right, Mr. PT, Mrs. PT, help me, I want you to do an assessment of how well I'm executing my performance doing a deadlift, they'll probably pick up on 1, 2, or 3 things that immediately they're like, you've got this part right, but you could work on this a bit more. Let's do a video, shoot a video, look at you in the mirror, and like, I'm going to guide you through what better posture, what better lifting, more efficiency looks like. And you'd say, great, thank you. I'm that's going to make this gym session be even more valuable. I think if you come and work with someone like me or a program like we run, the first thing I always say to people is, before we do any work, I need to know what your mental skill base is like. Like, you've talked about how you use self-talk, you've talked about how you use visualization. Brilliant. If I was working with you people, I'd be putting you further up, like their experience, they're good with their mentality. Maybe it's more a shaping exercise rather than a creation exercise. And that's brilliant for me because unlike that PT in the gym, we need to take what you do already and make an improvement on it rather than starting from ground zero. So I think that sort of explains my philosophy. And then when people actually come and ask the question, they're like, yeah, of course, you're a pro, you know what to look for, you know how to program and periodize like a PT would. Let's get going. How can I make this improvement? So I've got 10 weeks till this important race. And if we get this right, I should get a good time or good performance.
Got it. Makes sense. Yeah, I think also a huge, like what Bruno said before about this big race, that somebody has a huge challenge is also always that there's this, like your A race almost seems like after that, nothing else is coming anymore, and then you just think this is my biggest goal in life or one of my biggest achievements. And you just build it up so much in your head. But in the end, it's just another race, right? There's always going to be another one most of the time. And I guess that's also when you talk to professional athletes who go to the Olympics, where this only happens every 4 years. This is even a crazier build-up. So how do you see pros working towards a goal like this? And what are those key elements that you then bring to amateur athletes?
I mean, well, this is a great question and so relevant to an interview I heard this week in the UK with Keely Hodgkinson, who's the Olympic 800 champion. She had a great year, won gold in Paris, and then was really looking forward to the season and going to the Worlds in Tokyo that we just had. But she got a long injury and made it back and did really well, got silver or bronze. But she knew that like the turnaround to from injury rehab to this race wasn't going to be long, and she had to just do everything to throw the kitchen sink at it. But the interviewer was saying that research has shown after the Olympics, between 50 to 75% of athletes experience some kind of depressive symptoms. And, you know, these are the elite people who get support from people like me on program. And we actually implement, even after the Worlds this year in swimming, as we did with Paris, we offered athletes the chance to do a debrief after the games. And what that means is it's a structured, reflective exercise to make sense of what happened, to let out and vent about what went well, what didn't go well. Also to point out the things that they may not have got the result or medal they wanted, but there's definitely things they should celebrate. And often athletes are the worst at taking the small wins because they didn't get the big gold medal. They didn't get the specific time that they've trained for. So we can spot these things in advance. And in that structured debrief, the thing that comes back when we've talked to athletes is, you know, having done this exercise, do you feel better now? Have you managed to park the performance that bit better? And nearly always they're like, yeah, I didn't realize that this could be quite a powerful tool. And for me, that's another one that we should do in amateur world, because you're working in a proper job. Maybe you've got a young family or something like that. You've got an elderly relative who's very sick and you've gone through that training cycle. You've thrown everything at it and then you didn't get the time you want. And it can feel like a waste of time or money, especially say you're European. You go and do a Boston or New York marathon, expensive, both the race, the trip. So if it doesn't come off, it's even more regret than if you did the local marathon around the corner from you. So there's that part to it. And I just think, you know, you always have this cliche, always have something planned for after you've had your big event so that you've got something to look forward to whatever happens in the race. There's a truth to that, but I think it has to be coupled with having a serious sit down with your coach, or if you don't have a coach, with yourself, and actually go through, okay, you know, let's have a process where I mentally process what goes on. And when we mentally process something, it won't take away the poor result, but what it will do is give your brain and your psyche a bit more perspective and put it in context. But I know, I get it. There's people who throw everything at their racing, their performance, their sport. They love it so much that it can feel so deflating. We're not trying to demean that. I think it's just really important to try and help people. So sometimes it's not just about training self-taught, training visualization. I'm helping the athlete cope better with what happens pre-race in the training, the big event itself, and afterwards too. I think it's really important that people, even if they don't do psych work that is typical and people know about, that one is a super important one that all people should do. But, you know, I can't make people do that. That's up to them.
Uh-huh. And Stu, big question now. How much do you think of an athlete's success can be attributed to mental resilience? How much, like, I'm sure that's a question you get a lot. Do you have a sense for how to answer this question? Like, what differentiates the number one pro versus the 100th pro, you know? How much do you think mental resilience actually plays a role in success?
I mean, you'd think that I'm quite biased on this, and that, you know, I'd say everything.
Probably.
It's an interesting one because it's the interplay between the physical capability, and you can have great physical capability, but on the day, you know, an old injury flares up. It's different points of the cycle for females. It's you get something physical that you couldn't have legislated for, and you have to adapt. So you've got to think about that. So you've got physical training, things that you've got to manage in race that you couldn't have legislated for, and then there's the mental piece. And I think for me, if you know, the classic thing is when you look at the very best, the Lionel Messis, the Michael Jordans, and you look at like Elliot Kipchoge is a classic example in running. Yes, they had great physicality, they had great technique, but they also, what separated them out was they had a great mindset, and they were, loads of people said about Kipchoge for the Sub-2 project, he's not going to do it. And, you know, it's too much for the human body to be able to actually do, a bit like what they said for the Sub-4 mile. And okay, you could argue about the super shoes, you could argue about the drafting and whatever, but ultimately he did do the time. And there were all the naysayers, but he believed he could do it. And that's the thing that's massive. It's about, and you look at like what he does. He reads a lot of self-help books. He leads a very modest life. He deliberately wants to train his mind to cope with the hardest demands of the sport. So if you might see that book up here, sort of behind me, on the top shelf next to the plant, is the book I wrote, The Psychology of Running, with Dr. Noel Brick. And Noel Brick researches all aspects of endurance performance from the mind. And he was the guy that did the research around how if you smile and relax your jaw and think certain thoughts, that Kipchoge actually used in the Breaking 2 project. It's been experimentally tested. It's been used in the real world, and it shows that, yes, you can do it. But then if you say to the Kipchoge, well, how much of the win today was mental and how much was physical? And he had all of that sports science team from Ineos doing all the different metrics. They would be able to kind of try and put their version of, well, we think roughly this much physical, this much mental. And then you ask Kipchoge, and he would probably give you a different interpretation, and he was the guy doing the race. So it really varies. I have asked that question of athletes. I asked it of the England netball team, and I went round, and when I was working with them, and I said, how much of your performance do you think is physical and how much is mental? And like, there's 15 players in that squad, and they all gave a slightly different answer. So we can't just go, it's this much or it's this much. It's an interplay between the two. And obviously, if you put yourself in peak physical condition and peak mental condition, and you have a good day, your belief effect is going to really power you on. But we can't just say it's 40%, it's 30%, it's 20, it's 50. It's up to the athlete, really. But it does make a difference.
Yeah, but you always see cases. I remember this comment that you said about Kipchoge with the smiling. He mentioned that. I've heard that before, that he does that. And I mean, also I'm obviously a huge triathlon fan, and there you also hear it a lot. I just watched a documentary from Daniela Reef where she talks about her career, and she also mentioned how, I think she even stated like how she was so successful mainly because of her mental strength. And I found that super interesting. And then also, I mean, you look at Lucy Charles, right, who 2023 won Kona with a torn calf, and the first kilometers of the marathon just pushed her with her mind so through that pain because she really didn't want to get second again. I think that's also an attribute to the mental strength, instead of just giving up and being like, it's done, it's over, right? So you can see it over and over again that people that just have this belief, they just make it happen somehow, even against all odds somehow.
And interestingly, just talking triathlon world, we're very proud in this country of Alex Yee, who won gold in Paris and who has taken on the marathon, who is champion across all different events in triathlon. And he's gone public and said that after I think he had an injury and a dip in performance, he worked with a sports psychologist. Now, he wasn't doing what I'm describing, like ongoing work in advance of something. This was like probably more about like coping with the injury, coping with the setback. But he really does credit that that's had a huge impact on his performances since as well. I work at the same pool that he trains in. I'm not in the triathlon program. I'm in the swimming program, and I don't interfere with other practitioners' work. So I don't know whether he accesses the triathlon site and is built on that groundwork he did back then. But I think it shows that, like, for him, on his journey to be at the top, he has accessed that and credits it with having a huge effect. So that sort of answers that part too.
Yeah, Alex, he's an amazing athlete. The way that this guy runs is just mind-blowing. We were watching the Olympics race for triathlon last year, and we were really next to the course, and we saw Hayden Wild passing, and it was like, oh my God, he won. And then, you know, somebody was watching from a screen because we were not right next to the finish line. And then somebody said, oh my God, Alex, you passed him. And we were like, what? Like, this is not possible. It was really crazy. So yeah, this guy.
You got to remember, in the UK, he has one of the all-time record 5K times on a track. So
fast.
For that to not even be his main sport, That's impressive. And his debut at London this year in the marathon, he came 14th overall, not 14th in British, like 14th overall. And, you know, most people when they're doing a marathon, even at the top end, are like, I just need to go out and see what I've got here today and what I'm capable of. And now he's going back to Valencia in December. And I've got clients who are doing it, so I'm going to be watching them, but I'm also going to have a good eye on his performance too.
I want to bring the conversation back to this aspect of pros versus amateurs. And you touched already upon a big difference that you see with regards to how they deal with training, and how you mentioned that amateurs sometimes will get frustrated with their training. If the training didn't go well, they might be then, you know, suffering from that. I mean, like, everything is gone. My training cycle is not working out. Whilst the pros, actually, most of them will just realize, okay, this is just the best session. I probably just need to rest and recover, and tomorrow I'm ready again. Now, how about in terms of race mentality? Are you able to pick out what are the big differences there between how a pro approaches a race versus how an amateur might approach a race?
Yeah, I guess you've got to be fair to all parties. The people at the sharp end of a race, they probably have done more racing at a sharp end and have built confidence from how they've done that than someone who's more of dare I say, a mid-pack runner. I mean, you know, mid-pack runners become fast runners as well, so I'm not trying to discriminate there. And we know that one of the pieces of research is that people who are at the sharper end of whatever their endurance sport is tend to have higher self-perception of their abilities. They have a better ability to handle pain and push through. That there's just certain key metrics that are crucial to, you know, obviously they have to have speed in their legs, but just because of their experience and some of the stuff that you were saying as well earlier, that like, does experience breed stronger mental resilience? Yeah. But I think there's a key thing about sort of self-perception and self-image there, and how someone who is more a pro athlete, you know, that's their thing. They get access to people like us. So you know, they've got certain things in their toolbox, which an amateur athlete just doesn't have the access to, which is part of the reason why I want to democratize what I do and say, this isn't smoke and mirrors. There's genuine science and evidence behind it. And, you know, I've got strength coach friends, and they say so many endurance athletes don't do strength work at all. And if they just did a bit more, they'd be much better. And that's kind of my philosophy as well. If you were doing small chunks of this work on a frequent basis, I'm not saying your performance is guaranteed to improve, but you massively increase the probabilities that you'll get better. You'll be more mentally robust. You'll cope better with difficult parts of races. You'll feel more empowered and stronger on the start line because you won't be panicking. And that's what I was alluding to earlier when I said that more amateur people, and that's not to do, it sounds really, I have to make some differentiation between like different kinds of athletes. So I hope that anyone's listening who takes umbrage with the idea that I'm calling them amateur, but you know, in the scheme of where the top 100 might be compared to first few thousand in a triathlon or a race, that's what I mean. That they just haven't, they might be experienced at races, but they haven't got the knowledge, they haven't had the training, they might be questioning but not knowing where to start on this side of performance. And you can go a long way with analyzing your own performance, but sometimes it takes someone else who's a bit more skilled to look at what you're doing and just make that assessment. I think I eat pretty well, a balanced nutritionist diet, but if I went to talk to the nutritionist here at Swimming and said, this is what I tend to have for breakfast, lunch and dinner, is that optimal for my sport? I know they'll come back and say, well, look, you're doing most of the right things, but let's fine tune how that would work. And I actually did that when I was in paraswimming. I said to the nutritionist, I've got this big race I'm doing. Do you mind just keeping an eye on when we were away at competition, if I'm eating the right things at the right time? And she went, you're kind of 80% of the way there, but you should like drop a little bit more of the bread in the morning, have a bit more protein, and make sure you're fueling as quickly as possible after your quality sessions. And again, she didn't make my performance, but it helped in getting my PB at that time. And, you know, I just think part of it's being open to great advice from people who know what they're doing to help you across all the different elements of your performance. And I think if you're, there's a lot of ego, isn't there? Even for amateurs. Oh, there's nothing wrong with me. I don't need to see a psychologist, or, oh, I don't need to think about nutrition. But if you can be open and say, I'm not perfect and I just want to make a gradual improvement day by day, you're more likely to get the performance gains in a race that the elite end, which is your original question, how are they different? They're open to anything to help them get better. And they know that like it's a stacking process rather than an overhaul process.
It's actually funny that you mention nutrition, because Bruno and I were just experimenting with an app to track our nutrition, and it gives you, based on your training, it gives you a nutritional advice on the macronutrients. And we both are quite conscious of it already, but then we also, like I personally realized, oh my God, for breakfast, again, too much fat, not enough protein, and, you know, just like the macronutrients. And while I was thinking I was eating well, or also the bread, I was for sure taking too much bread to pre-run. Today I took one bread, I was like, oh my God, that's already enough for pre-snack, because then I still have breakfast afterwards. So yeah, I agree. This especially compounded over time can make a lot of difference, right? Because you're not just doing that one day, but you really like doing it over and over again. And the same for mental training. If you just do it over and over again a little bit, it just compounds over time. So it's I just had to laugh when you mentioned nutrition, because we're just going on.
Yeah. Definitely, it's definitely true. You know, always going back to the earlier question about how much is mental, how much is physical. If you always gamify it, you know, how can I make a gain in the next cycle I'm doing? How can I make an improvement in my nutrition, even if it's only a little bit? How can I improve my mobility, my recovery, my, you know, it's usually the one thing that doesn't really change much is the core training that people do. But it's all the surrounding elements on top of that aerobic work that people make a little change. You don't want to modify too many things at once, but if you make a few key changes and then like keep going on the same training cycle, you'll probably get a different result.
Yeah. I want to move a bit to practical tips, because we have a lot of listeners that really are, I think it's a broad spectrum, but beginners, but then also more advanced, serious amateurs, I would say, maybe even pros.
Yeah.
But again, I also don't want to offend anybody by calling them amateurs. But yeah, I mentioned self-talk before, that I do that sometimes, but again, I haven't done any research on that. I just do it naturally in a way. How do you advise an athlete to do self-talk in training and then towards racing? What are some tips you can give to the listeners?
Well, I think you picked out a really crucial part of the psychological piece. I think it's really good you've raised this. Here in Manchester at the elite pool, where we've got a number of Olympic medalists and some really good juniors too, the head coach there is probably in the sports psych stuff. Other than having great emotional regulation, he wants athletes to also have good self-talk. Now, interestingly, those two things are linked, because if you have good self-talk just in every day and in training, the likelihood is that'll transfer to the performance part. And he's very acutely aware that how an athlete talks about themselves, sees themselves, talks to themselves, will have an impact on the possibility of them having the kind of performance that they really want to have. And so how can you train it? I think the first thing is understand what it is you say to yourself already. We're busy people. Yes, you've got a full-time job and you're training. Sometimes you just blindly go into the session that you're going to do in whatever your sport, and you're not even recognizing what you're thinking. You know, we call this metacognition, me and Noel in our book. And when you're analyzing your own metacognition, your self-talk, you suddenly take, if you tune into it, the thing we often hear athletes say is, sometimes the way I talk to myself, I'd never talk to a friend like that. That's not good self-talk then. For me, that is like a red flag. Suddenly we're not going to take someone who's harsh with themselves and turn them into, you know, some kind of really happy, upbeat, hyper positive person. We're not asking you to change that, but if you think more deeply about how you're talking to yourself, maybe use that as a starting point. Analyze over a week in the hard training sessions, I was beating myself up, or I was being really harsh, I was being critical, or whatever it might be. Take that analysis and say, next week, do I want to go to the same track session, same bike session, same swim session, and think like that? Probably not. Okay, right. So, without even turning your negativity into some happy clappy positivity, how can you take the sting out of how you're talking about yourself? And maybe use the adage, would I talk to a friend like this? Would I support myself or a friend like this if I had the choice? No. Right. Well, there's your starting point. And then the two kinds of self-talk that you can have are motivational. So how you're talking about doing training this week, and or previously, and you're thinking, God, this is really hard. It's effortful. I'm not enjoying this. To being like, change that narrative to be something like, this is going to help me get quick. This is going to help my performance. And there's so much space that people, they do the training almost like in a haze. And for me, the massive gap you're missing is to get the maximum out of a session. If you've got the right thinking and you mentally tune in how you could do, you're getting the hit from the physical training and the periodization you'll get, and the increase in VO2 or whatever it is that you're wanting, power and wattage on bikes. But if you have that extra part that you maximize of the mind, you're getting a really good value for money from your session. And I think, and that's what I say, that people are leaving money on the table and then saying, why am I not performing? Why am I not getting the result I want? It's like, well, if you took all that cash that you've got there and, invested it properly, you'd have more money. So you've got the motivational piece, like how can you talk to yourself more kindly, more usefully in training and in racing? And then instructional, sometimes if it's like, the classic thing is 2/3 of the way through a hard session, it's really hurting, it's really hard, you're feeling deadbeat. Rather than getting into your own head, maybe think more about what instructions are going to help you. So, a lot of you think about swimming, it's a lot about technique. On the bike, it's about positioning and tucking in and how you do your cadence. Running is all about your form. If you watch a marathon at the same point from the winner, as they run by, maybe from 13 miles onwards, to the person an hour behind them, one of the key things you'll notice is the form starts to collapse of the athletes that you see come by. Well, there's a reason why the person at the front's got good form and the person at the back's got worse form. But then you might say, well, what's that person doing in training to improve their form? Well, if they were using instructional self-talk, it would be, okay, don't collapse in on yourself. Relax your shoulders, relax your wrists, look up, as if being, the thing we always got told is just imagine your head's being pulled up by a balloon. And however hard a session is, if you focus more on your form and getting through the rep, you're going to feel better when you finish the performance, and you'll get the performance benefit because your form's better when you're tired and fatigued. It'll get built into how you actually run. So I think there's, in self-talk terms, key messages are: analyze what you're doing already, think about what's negative and what you could just dial down and make improvements on. Think about leaving cash on the table and you don't want to waste your investment. And 4, when you're struggling, even if you're not necessarily saying the right things to yourself, get into the right headspace about how you could get into the right form to be efficient.
One thing I do like since a while, and also maybe that ties to, I did a Vipassana retreat last year, which is like a 10-day meditation, right? And you really, when there's pain, you also talk a lot of working through pain, bodily pain, because you're meditating in a pose for 1 hour and you focus on the pain. And that's something now I am doing in my training when I have a hard session. Instead of like trying to ignore the pain, I'm actually focusing on it and know it will pass, and tell myself that. And that really worked super well for me, because I just know it's going to pass. And I'm actually, instead of ignoring it and trying to, I don't want to have it, I accept it's there. And I really just focus on it. And that's really has been helping a lot. So I don't know if that's also something you tell athletes, to actually focus on the pain and really go through that.
Yeah, it's a really good point, and no one on a podcast has actually raised it, but it is crucial and linked to evidence that we have, even going back to the 70s, that you asked what's the difference between the way that a professional or elite would think and act, and what's it like with the weekend warrior who's participating in their sport. And what the studies showed was the elite level people, instead of kind of trying to push the pain away or wish it was all over, are able to tune into their bodies, and they know they've got the confidence, that they've got the physicality. So they tune in like you're describing, and whether in training or in racing. And when they've done that, it's called associating. They can better associate with the pain and discomfort. Now, they don't concentrate on it all through a race or a training session, but where their body is sort of like screaming out, they can lean into that. And like you just did in your yoga retreat, they know that it will pass. And a more amateur mindset is like, I'm in agony. This means it's going to be agony to the end. I'm going to try and disassociate and look at the surrounding and the environment and hope that the pain part will go away. So you've actually developed and nurtured a skill that elites do there. And, you know, one thing that athletes are terrible for because of their busy schedules is recovery. And I think doing something akin to what you were describing in their recovery, because often you might be smashed at the end of a hard training session, you know, on the foam roller, doing your ice bath or whatever, actually tuning into the pain. I always call it discomfort, because I think pain is more about injury and not listening to your body properly. But if as long as you're healthy and it's just natural DOMS, fine, and work through that discomfort in the recovery and in key sessions, and you're going to have both an easier time of what you're doing, and it's got scientific evidence that it helps.
Continuing on the topic of practical tips, do you have any advice for amateurs or any kind of person that takes participation in sport, of how to deal with potentially when they reach what they most dread? So, you know, maybe for Lucy Charles, it's like, okay, shit, somebody passed me again and I'm second. But most commonly for all us that are not that good and don't have those kinds of problems, you know, if you suddenly realize, oh, I'm hitting the wall in the marathon or I'm bonking. I'm thinking of, I don't know if you ever worked with tennis players, but I have to ask because that was all my youth. And in tennis, the choking feeling was super present. So often you're about to win a game and you're about to win a match, and then suddenly you just choke, and then you do a double fault, or you make mistakes that are like just really easy. You know, you just feel like something very strange is happening where you just cannot close the match. Any advice there, like how to deal in situations when you realize, oh no, the worst that I imagine is actually here?
Yeah, again, I think some people might worry that I'm somewhat of a doom and gloom merchant, but I'm really not. I'm wanting to help people work through whatever issues they face in their event. And if you're somewhat experienced, you will know there's a few things that could go wrong. Obviously, there are times where something happens you can't legislate for, and you just have to work with it or through it in a race. And sometimes people never actually work through it and they struggle all the way to the finish. Like you're saying, they hit the wall, they're stuck there, and they kind of cross the line, say never again, and throw a big pity party, which is completely fair and understandable. Again, this is why training the mental part of your performance is super great. But one of the aspects that I want my athletes to do, elite or amateur, is do a little bit about the what if. What if the worst things happen in my race? Because if we go in with the belief that everything's going to be perfect because I've done this killer training block and nothing's gone wrong. I spoke to Mario Frioli on an interview earlier this year, and he said, it's a great comment, the thing that worries him most as a coach is when someone has a flawless training block, because then if something happens in the race, they haven't got any evidence to go back to and say, I pushed through that part of the sucky session, that was going wrong and I pulled it round. But if you have a flawless training block, that's not your fault. You've done everything right. But if you're really, really hyper motivated to get a sub-3, a Boston qualifying time, the qualifying time in a triathlon to go to Kona or whatever it might be, you kind of are cheating yourself a little bit. That might be harsh language to use, but if you the elite people I've worked with, they legislate for everything. There's a guy that came here that I know, and he's been public about it, Martelletti. He won the Manchester Marathon in 2014, and he came up and we went round the course because he lived in London. He came up to Manchester. He had arrived. This is how level of detail he went. We drove the course. He had got a map that he had drawn out of the course, and he was looking at like where the wind would potentially be in a different direction at different points. And he was mentally visualizing it. So he's using your visualization, Bruno, and he was imagining the day before the race. Okay, so we're going through a part of the countryside. There's no hedges there. We could have quite a lot of wind cut across us. And he was marking like little arrows of where the wind could be in that race. Now, you might argue that that's a rather extreme way to prepare. And I'm using it not to say that's what you should do, but just the difference of like someone who really wanted the win, physically was capable of doing it, and didn't leave anything to chance. So if you're more of a weekend warrior, I guess one of the things I'd be advocating for is what might be the potential banana skins in your event, maybe things that have happened in other races, things that are worrying you in advance of this race. And what are you doing about it? What are you going to do if something like that happens? And I think if you prepare, it's a process we call priming in psychology. If you prepare and prime your mind for the potential of something going wrong, when it does happen, if it does happen, you're much more able to turn it around and go, well, actually, we imagine that we might hit the wall at mile 17. And one of the things we said to ourselves is stay calm, work through the next mile. Don't panic. Don't hit the panic button. Focus on form, like we were saying before, and let's just try and get through it. And then we might come out the other side, and it might just be a passing phase rather than telling a story to ourselves. Oh, well, there we go again. I've hit the wall. We're not going to get the time today. Let's throw all the cards out the window. So I think being prepared, but not necessarily so over prepared that actually the process derails your performance. Just have a little think about what could potentially go wrong and what are you going to do? If something goes wrong, how are you going to think? How are you going to talk to yourself? How are you going to work through it as best as you can? And that's part and parcel of endurance sport. It's sadly part of the territory. You can't have a flawless race. Most people I know who've done multiple marathons will say, I've done 15 marathons and 2 or 3 of them were great. And the rest, well, they're a mixed bag.
Yeah, that actually, when you were talking like that, it reminded me of trail races. And when I hear, especially like, 100-mile races, where you always have a challenge. The trail race, an ultra is never an easy run, right? You're always going to be in the pain cave for a while. You have ups and downs. So it's not even the question if something is going to happen, it's when and how you deal with it. And I think those people are especially good at dealing with the unknown because it's going to happen for sure.
Yeah. You've really picked out something there that I find that road racers and trail runners, they've got a bit of a different mentality, but that's almost a self-selection thing, because people who do trail and ultra, they don't really want to do road races. They might do a 10K tune-up in their training, but generally they stay away from the road. It's just the difference. And, in the same way, the things cyclists bring up compared to that and the things I get in swimming. The endurance has a lot of commonality to it, but every sport's got unique challenges, and, understand the unique challenges of your event rather than try and run away from it. Lean into that maybe a bit more.
Yeah. And Stu, what is your thought on what's the place, where does joy fit in all of this equation and actually being happy and enjoying what you're doing? I'm asking that because I realized that on my going back to tennis, the whole mental thing triggers me thinking about tennis because it was such a difficult sport from that point of view. I was also very young, so I do have some mental traumas from that. But basically, I realized that I put too much pressure on myself and there was no joy at some point. And I think that
Yeah.
really brought me out of the sport. I burned out. I couldn't do it anymore. So what are your thoughts there? Like, we've been talking about, how to work on things and kind of, figure out how to get better at being stronger and doing this and doing that and getting support. But what about joy?
Well, first of all, I'm sorry to hear that you dropped out of your sport partly through losing the joy. Because if you think about when you're a kid, you'd probably play tennis, you wouldn't care about the result. You were into hitting balls, doing a little bit of competition, being playful. So, and I've heard Djokovic talk about this, that he was hitting a slump as an adult. And I think his coach just talked to him and said, why did you get into tennis in the first place? What did you find enjoyment about it? And could you play just in a training session as if you were the 10-year-old boy as you once were? And he said it unlocked something in him that, like, he kind of just lost sight of, because he was a pro and he's playing tennis so much, he'd lost sight of being that young tennis player and how much enjoyment he got from it. And he leaned into it, and it unlocked his, like, oh, I'm being too serious. I should just enjoy this game. And I think he won, a stack of competitions after that, which Djokovic generally does. If we look at it in the world of endurance sport, again, I keep going back to this model of a lot of the people I'm engaged with have clients, even less so in the elite sport, because that's their job. And, they've got the luxury of not having to stress about running a business, or, swimmers tend to not have families yet because they retire quite early. And I think the weekend warrior, if we use that as a mold and a template, they're so busy with their family, they're so busy in their job, they're fitting training in around that, or they're doing their training and fitting family and working because they see themselves as athletes, which is a really nice thing to sort of see someone so dedicated. But because of that dedication, they lose sight of that joy that you're talking about, and they get too serious. I work with a coach here in Manchester, and he's often bouncing what the client work is like and what people say, and broadly I could group a lot of it into people get into the sport because they love it. They get good quite quickly. We see this trend where someone, starts cycling, starts running or whatever, and there's this quick effect where you're smashing times, taking huge chunks off personal bests and races. But then you hit a bit of a plateau, and you're then in the world of salami slicing, a bit of time here and a bit of time there. But that's the dangerous point. For me, that's the point where people might lose sight of why they do what they do, that they have caught up and they make that Boston qualifier, that particular race, an all or nothing event, rather than seeing it as something to strive towards, but hold it in perspective. And when it goes wrong, if it goes wrong, then it feels like the world's crashing down. And it's a privilege to be able to train and be good at what you do. And you should maximize that opportunity if that's your thing, but also not lose sight of it's just sport. I think you said this earlier in the podcast that, when you step back from it, if you imagine yourself in 5 years' time and you can't do your sport, you've just got old, you've moved on to something else. How do you want to remember the last 2, 3, 4 years of what you did? Do you want to look back at it as like being down in the dumps because you're not getting the results that you're seeing, you're taking it too seriously, you're getting all caught up? Or do you want to say, it was a real challenge, I'm rewarding myself for actually managing to do as much training as I did, see how far I could push my talent in the time I had, and try and enjoy it? And I think sometimes when you time travel with people like that, they're like, oh yeah, I'm being an idiot about this, I need to chill out. No offense if that's how you are at the moment.
Always the best thing to zoom out or take a moment, step back, zoom out, and then you can see it from like a bird's eye perspective, and then things look a bit different.
100%, yeah.
I would like to hear from you a story that you have in mind from one of the weekend warriors you work with, some big change you saw since working with you.
Okay. I mean, obviously in my world, one of the things that is really important, even when I'm doing, training programs and working with athletes, is that I've got to respect confidentiality of athletes. So I can't talk about everyone. But an athlete who has been public is one who's in my cohort at the moment, and we've worked together for over a year, I want to say. They had a really difficult few years in their trail running, and physically they lost their way a bit. They worked with a coach I know on strength, nutrition, and being robust so they weren't getting injured and that they were sustainably improving. And it took a long time. And because of that journey, they'd lost some of that joy that we're talking about. And recently, this athlete just got better. They did the work with me, gave all of themselves to the work, which again is a crucial part. Sometimes that's what, people who come to work for me, my sales pitch is, this is going to be long, it's going to be hard, and because it takes time, it might be expensive, but that's what's probably going to get you the results. Some people, that's what they really need. Other people need the bite-sized training that you talked about before, and they just need more of a tweak than an overhaul. But in this case, this lady went out, she did a 50 miler. That's right. She did a 50 miler, and she got a PB in a race she'd done before in her training block towards the 100 miler. And all the things that she had been implementing, the 50 was the mock exam, and they absolutely aced the mock exam, and their confidence went straight up for the 100 miler. And they'd had a really good training block. They'd got a bunch of tools that they could use in race. Like you're saying, in trail, you need to have a huge repertoire for loads of different possible scenarios. They worked on that. They had more confidence. They took more joy. They were peaking after kind of being in the lowest of the lows. And they came in the top 20 of a 100 milers up here in the Lake District. And I can't ask any more of that client. They everything I asked them to do, they did. It was not me dictating. It was a collaboration we did together, picking out where they had elements they needed to work on in their performance, go out, test, refine, come back, discuss, improve, refine. And they did the work. And so when they got the reward, I was super pleased, not for myself and like, oh, look what I've managed to do as a psychologist. I was like, I'm pleased for them. They've come from such a place of where they were to get this great result, and they were ecstatic. So that's just the one example of many where it can make a difference. But like I said at the start, every individual is unique.
Mm. Nice story. We're getting to the end of the podcast. We would like to ask you some provocating questions if we haven't done that already. Do you think there is a thing of being mentally too tough in endurance sport? Like, you're too resilient, really nothing can break you, kind of David Goggins type of thing?
Yeah. I mean, 100%. I always advocate quite a lot from the start of our work with clients is, look, my job, my first thing that I have to do as a psychologist, I'm chartered, I'm registered with the Healthcare Professional Council here in the UK. I've got to adhere to the well-being of athletes. And I want you to push yourself as far as you can, like a coach does, but within the bounds of safety. My practice is based on having a really solid base of overall mental well-being before we get to the performance piece. And I've got to check that. If I sense that an athlete needs to get professional clinical help, then I say, I can work with you, but you need to go and work at this thing first and come back to me when you're in a better place. That's my duty of care. And then when it comes to people, building up to these big events and they've got huge blocks of training, either aerobically, anaerobically, I'm like, I want you to push yourself as hard as you can. And that you need to differentiate the difference between mental and physical discomfort and pain. And if you're getting the signals of pain and it's your body pushing itself too hard, then you need to back off. And I can't be with you. So you've got to be a smart athlete to do that. But you can't hold me responsible for, you told me to keep going and push really hard and I broke. It's like, no, I'm giving you the warning. Do not do that. Because if you're training for something mega and you've built up 5-6 months worth of training, are you going to jeopardize your health for one race or potentially being out of action for another 5 or 6 months afterwards? I want you to be well. It's a very emotionally, physically demanding set of sports that we have. My first duty of care, like airlines, isn't about getting people from point A to point B. It's safety first.
Distinct pain and discomfort, because if you're running and you're pushing through the pain, which indicates maybe an injury or something else, maybe you should stop versus the discomfort of the good pain or the good discomfort.
There you go. 100%. Okay, what's next? Hit me.
All right, this one is less provoking. The final question, we just want to ask you, if you could teach an athlete one mental skill before their biggest race, what would it be and why?
I would probably argue the motto you should have embossed in your mind is stay calm. Whatever happens, taper, pre-race, in race, close of race, if something happens you weren't legislating for, before you hit that panic button, stay calm, take on board all the stuff we've worked through and implement. But you're like a tuning fork. You need to kind of tune into the amplitude of what's happening for you and not panic. Because when we go into a stress state, that's where we see people fall apart. So staying calm before anything else is a foundational block.
So being in control, you have to feel like you're in control in a way.
I wouldn't even argue it's control. I think because sometimes you're just so in a hole or in a pickle in a race that you need to just keep things as level as you can, because they're quite physically, emotionally charging. Even when you're in a good place, you're running well, you're cycling well, your overall energy is going to be very up, and you need to just calm it as much as you can in that moment. You're not going to go back to a state of calm where you're sitting in your bedroom, but you're going to be as calm in the race before you make decisions, before you work out whether you're going to drop out or you're going to push on or whatever it might be. Stay as calm as possible, even if you're someone who's a bit of a hothead.
Don't panic.
Okay, then maybe provocating follow-up question, but how do you stay calm? How is it possible? What would you tell people? Because it's easy to say stay calm, but then how do you actually get to that point?
Everyone's recipe is unique, but that's why you practice these skills in training. Think about what your nature's like, think about what set you off before, and change focus from maybe exploding and panicking to just taking a more measured approach, like we said. But you know what those triggers are, what you're like, and before you set out, just try and have a little think and prime yourself.
Yeah, a skill like no other. Gotta practice. Makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you so much, Stu. It was a big pleasure to talk to you and learn from you. We really appreciate your time and you coming on the podcast.
Thank you. It's been great to talk to you guys.
Thank you so much for tuning in to Human Endurance. We hope you have enjoyed this episode. If you like the show, don't forget to rate it and hit the subscribe button whatever you're listening to it. This helps us to reach a bigger audience. Thank you and see you next time.